This is episode 17 of Writer's Block. That sounds about right. Am I right? 17? I actually put
You're the only
17
one
question mark into the chat, and then
True.
no one corrected me. So I'm going to say is episode 17 of Writer's Block. I was looking for a guest this week. I was on a quest for a guest, but my quest went
Episode
awry.
16. Episode 16.
You're so tilted.
Episode 16 of Writer's Block. Are we on? I thought we were on 17.
Yeah, dude. I'm on your YouTube channel right now.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
episode 16.
All right, episode 16 of Writer's Block. We're going to talk about FaZe this week.
That's fucking amazing.
All right, Sam. Let's get together. Get your shit together. You gotta be prepared for this episode.
Yeah.
Dude, my shit's
mean,
all together. Get your shit together, bro. Like,
I said Sam, not Max.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Like,
go on.
actually, I need to reframe Sam's fucking shit. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about FaZe. My thing with them, I recently released an article yesterday with about FaZe, and my opinion with them is like now's the perfect time for them to break apart. Like as I talked about a lot in the last episode, like a lot of these teams that are in the top 10 are getting older. I posted a graph to Twitter maybe a week or so ago, where like teams like even Liquid's been together for 6 months, Astralis has been together for 10 months, FaZe has been together, if you don't count the time that Olaf Meister was out, for 14 months, almost 15 now, 15 in like 10 days. This team is really old, and you've seen a long, slow decline for them. And I was just thinking, okay, this is sort of a random win here at Epicenter. I mean, that's sort of you can either take it two takes, and this is, I guess, going to form the basis of the episode. One take is, okay, they're an old team who has stars on it, and they, Guardian and Olaf, not Guardian and Olaf Meister, but Guardian and NiKo, killed it this last tournament. And that they sort of randomly won. Or two, okay, NiKo's figured out how to in-game lead. They got a system together. Let's see this team run out. This is the new phase. This is a good phase now. I mean, that's sort of I feel like the main two options you can go. And is this sound right to you, Max? Yes or no? Yay or nay? Is there a magical third option?
Sort of. I think it is. Well, I think it's pretty unreasonable to think that this is like a new phase that's going to become the best team in the world over another 6-month period, and that this style of literally just doing a better imitation of what Cloud9 did at the major, as you point out on Twitter, Scott, which I totally agree with, can in any way be consistent. I think this is way more just like the dead corpse of FaZe, just having like one of its left arms electrocuted, because when you like electrocute muscles, just like contracts, and then like the contraction, because they're like such a jacked dead corpse, just like punched Liquid and Na'Vi, and they somehow like won a trophy with just this like muscle spasm. I think that's way more probably what's going to happen, rather than this roster be anything better than what it is now. I think.
I don't think they look like Cloud9 at all. Like, at all. Like, I think that if you want to compare
Mirage?
Mirage, yeah.
I don't. Maybe it's just the matches that I watched. Like, I watched them on Mirage against ENCE, against Na'Vi, against...
Which are Na'Vi at groups? Na'Vi at groups?
Na'Vi at groups or Na'Vi in the playoffs?
Playoffs. So I didn't get a chance because we started early. I didn't get a chance to watch their series against... or maybe because I was doing other things, like watching Elder Scroll lore videos, but we're not going to judge. So basically,
we started 10 minutes early, dude.
in the matches that I watched, they looked quite static. Like when I think of Cloud9 and the majors, just so we see if we agree or disagree on what that looked like, I thought of a team that was like super quick paced, relying on getting picks, being tricksy, doing those things. And when I looked at a lot of emphasis on mid control on Mirage. And I didn't see that out of them at all. In fact, on CT side, they were like super static. In fact, when they played around mid versus ENCE, they got picked off a lot. So against the only time that I really saw them fight for mid was against Liquid, and even then I didn't think they were trying super hard to force plays to happen. It was more like Liquid was the one forcing plays to happen. and they were just on the other side, just trying to take mid control. I didn't think they were doing anything super aggressive. If the vibe that I got from watching them is they look like a Swedish team, like they looked like Fnatic or NiP, which is kind of like there's here are 5 guys, they're just kind of there, and they're you know, they might do one thing, they might not. They don't make a bunch of coordinated assaults on anything. You know,
I wouldn't use coordinated, but Max, I'll go. Are you done with? Is that okay, Sam? Did I cut you off there?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Go ahead.
Max, you want to reply to this, or you want me to take the lead?
Well, yeah, no, it's like so there was 2 different phases we saw, I think, at EPICENTER, and I think in general there is 2 different phases that's led under NiKo. And before, like, you jump into that, you have to realize, like, NiKo is a player who, and I did a piece at the end of the player break trying to compare, like, FaZe with Chroman and FaZe with Exist, and so I read a lot of interviews, and in all the interviews that NiKo did, he basically heavily implied that he preferred playing with Exist way more than he did with Chroman, and he saw Chroman as sort of this, like, just more plug-and-play, strong aimer, can do an above-average job in certain situations, whereas the Exist is a far more veteran support player who can fulfill a lot more roles, maybe not necessarily at as good an individual level, but in terms of his experience, and that he prefers playing that style with Exist, where he can look towards supported players more towards more structure. And so when he became in-game leader, in my head, I was like, all right, well, they're obviously going to be way more structured if NiKo is going to be the leader. But that structure actually comes in the form of a lot of very, very fast executes.
Yep.
And you can see that in both the Liquid and Na'Vi series in the playoffs, because you have to remember Liquid and Na'Vi, those 2 series were both played within like an hour of each other. Like it happened back to back. And especially the Na'Vi grand final, like, it was ridiculous what they were doing. On Mirage T side, like, they were executing, I think they executed like 4 rounds in a row or something like that, and all within the first 30 seconds of the round.
Yep.
And I think against Liquid, I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think it was more B-oriented on versus Liquid, and you saw Na'Vi actually start gambling B a lot, stacking B with CT, because I think they looked at the Liquid games, which actually, like you're saying, sort of led them awry. But yeah, Sam, to your point.
Well, actually, in NiKo's interview post final, he said that what they would do, they knew that that Na'Vi had watched their games, and that they knew that they expected Na'Vi to expect them to try to exploit Zeus on B, and so they would throw a couple fake nades really early in the round as if they were going to rush B, so to get Simple to start rotating off of A, and then they would go off of window and go towards B, and then they would rush A.
Yeah,
that was their plan.
And I read an interview somewhere as well about like how their game is structured around fast executes. I think it might have been with Olive Master or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
No, but the pace was very, very quick in the last 2 games. I think that's the conflict we're having. I don't think it's that we're calling Sam like wrong in his analysis. I think that you watch, like you were saying, you watch the Ents game, and I think even going back to ESL One New York and I watched some of those major games. It's a very different team than sort of that sort of style they developed in the playoffs. Within, like, I didn't even think about it really till Max brought it up just now, but yeah, those were played within, like, those 2 Mirage games. I think it was it the second game of the first series and the first game of the second series? I mean, like, I think they were, either way, it's still within a few hours of each other.
Same day.
Yeah, same day, so.
Yeah, but when I say, like, they're not like Cloud9, I don't mean to say that they don't move quickly around the map, but when you think about what Cloud9 was doing, they were not just doing really quick executes. They were pushing
define the flavor of the Mirage T side, especially because it wasn't
painting
necessarily
with the broad strokes. It's not exactly.
Sure, but like here's why. It's because when I think of teams like Mouse Sports or at that Cloud, think of teams of 2 or something like that trying to make a play somewhere and open up a piece of the map. But that's very different from doing a very quick execute, which is just an all-in approach where you're just like, okay, fuck it, let's go. And and so to me, when I look at Cloud9 or Mouse Sports, I look at something that's probably like much more strenuous in terms of tactics. Like, you need to be have a much more of a plan. Like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this. But like, even though as I said, it's not like they're brain dead. And I think that the narrative that NiKo would be a brain dead in-game leader is a little like unfounded. Like, it's not that it would necessarily be wrong, but it just assumes that because he's a good player, he wouldn't be smart at the game. But
I think
like,
based on the way they play, I don't think he's a very cerebral, strategy-heavy IGL.
right. But my point is more like, well, their game is quite simple. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's why it looks Swedish to me. Like Cloud9 or Mousesport's game, even though it's they flex on their skill, it was much more chaotic and complicated than this. And in fact, I think that they're not even playing very loose. Like they're not making a lot of individual plays.
No.
And in fact, I saw more individual plays against Ents, which makes sense, but
Yeah.
but because of the quality of the players, but much than like there were barely any against Liquid. It was quite startling, actually.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
The delivery was so bad.
well, okay, so sort of a couple interesting things there. I mean, I think the comparison to Cloud9 is mostly based on pace, but with
Sure.
FaZe on Mirage, I do think that it wasn't completely brain dead. I think. How would I put it?
Well, it's not brain.
No. It's just not super complicated. Like, when you think of it, like something can be loose and be quite complex. Like SK tends to be like that, or old SK was kind of like that. In this case, it's something that's relatively structured, but it's not super complicated. They play kind of like Space Soldier plays.
Okay, go ahead.
And I made the comparison to late 2016 Optic with Stan as well, where it's like the pace is the main sort of variance in their hits rather than the actual structure of the hits themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Well, okay. Here's the thing I was trying to capture just there. I think what I said in my piece was that I think that the opposing side had a really hard time keeping pace keeping FaZe in check. Like it seemed like what I'm talking about with the B stacks on Navi. I feel like Navi and Liquid both had a very hard time adjusting, and that FaZe responded. It seemed to sort of mind game the opposing side pretty well in a sort of a very macro sense. Maybe not in like a like which flashbang to throw, where to put each molly, because that was pretty repetitive round to round.
Yeah.
But no, it seemed like they had the pace was such that Liquid never felt comfortable in that Mirage game, nor did Navi. It felt like it seemed like from the get go that they were put on the back foot, and that FaZe sort of was relentless. And once they got that toehold, and then they got the confidence going, or they got that pace going, that they felt confident. Okay, let's rush A again. They're not going to stop us, and then they took lots of rounds that way. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, and the key thing is as well with that style is that it works when you're on you can't necessarily grind back into a game with that style, I don't think, because the reason it's so effective, especially against Navi, is that the status quo is set as a fast A exec when you know that's definitely not what their actual normal style is. So you're essentially you're baiting a team purposefully into thinking that your standard round is a fast A exec, except they know that you're baiting them into that. So that's where the B stack comes in, because they eventually, it's like that classic thing. It's like, well, they have to go B eventually.
There's 5 straight D's on a test. The sixth question is going to be a D again.
Yeah, and that's why Zeus has never passed a test in his life. Actually, that's a fun fact for you right there. I got that from close source. You go.
I'm not sure. Like it's a weird, because even though they went quite quickly in both matches, the way they did it was quite different in both matches. Like with Liquid, they went around mid, and it's like Navi seemed like they were playing more passively, but like Liquid was just, it's like if they started getting rolled on, we're not going to let ourselves be bullied, and then they got bullied even more because they swore at the bully. So they were pushing smokes through Cat, and they were trying really hard to get control of mid, and they just couldn't do it. And it was weird to me, because the few rounds where FaZe just didn't get a pick mid and played a little more slow because they weren't steamrolling, they got caught off. They got caught off trying to set up for an execute and things like that. So if Liquid had just waited a little more time before aggressing, I think they could have done a lot more. It was such a weird.
You touched on something really important there. and that was something I noticed because had been watching a bunch of the New York 2018 games, and you remember like NRG 2-0 FaZe.
Right. I was watching that series earlier because you made an interesting point on Twitter a couple of days ago where you're talking about I forget exactly. You sort of use your classic phrase, win conditions. Do you remember that tweet?
Yeah. So that's what So the way NRG beat FaZe was still looking for a lot of these very early executes, but NRG was in the driver's seat more early on, and they were able to actually dictate a lot of the pace of their own CT side and get to FaZe as they were setting up a lot of these executes, or play completely passively and just retake effectively. And they were never they were never in the right place at the right time for these fast executes to make them vulnerable. And I think that's really important because the way FaZe won EPICENTER and the way they lost to NRG aren't wholly dissimilar. And you would expect from going last place from one tournament to winning the next tournament that there'd be some dramatic change in how a team approaches a game, or at least a massive refinement or a clear bolstering of win conditions. Except the only thing that we saw that led FaZe at that point was NiKo having one of the best tournaments in a very long time, Guardian having one of his best tournaments in a very long time, Karrigan having one of the, like, every single person had a big map or a big moment. And so that would just suggest to me if the underlying structure and style, especially because we saw against Na'Vi in groups and Ensign groups, that they did try to play a slow style, which I forgot to mention before. Like, they did against Na'Vi and they got absolutely fucking clapped. They tried to play that really slow, like, execute late onto a site sort of style and got absolutely destroyed. And then the very second they just start playing to the same sort of approach that they had at New York 2018, but suddenly with like 3 potential MVP superstars in that execute when they're ahead, then you see it work, which is, you know.
Well, it's funny that you made that analogy at the beginning, like they get the shock and their arm snaps up, because I mean, that's been FaZe's story at the major too, that they were down 0-2. Okay, we got to panic, we got to try something. It seems like, this was a panic move going into the playoffs. But like this you sort of did a good job there of tying back to the original question of like, what do you think changed for FaZe at this tournament? And you seem to be, with that, the way you answered that one, pretty firmly on, okay, it's just strong individual performances. It was sort of a desperate basic style.
Also, the key thing, just to add in, and you could probably expand on this as well, is the fact Mirage was played in the big series, and that seems to be their only map that they can consistently win on as well.
Well, I mean, they won Dust 2 versus Na'Vi, but it was a lot of... I didn't
That
watch...
was their first Dust 2. That was their first Dust 2 played, like, ever with NiKo as an in-game leader. So, like,
but
and
also a lot of Inferno games for FaZe at this tournament. So they really didn't. Their map pool isn't tested, but I mean, it's sort of the classic story of FaZe, that they just like to play the most popular maps. But Sam, to pose the same question I posed to Max at the beginning of the episode, I mean, did you see a foundational going all the way back to pre-NiKo in-game leading FaZe? I mean, do you think that this is a new style, a new team? Because, I mean, more holistically, not getting sort of bogged down into this sort of Cloud9 comparison, I think the idea that this is a brand new roster, different FaZe, is, okay, maybe their T sides are different, but pretty much all the positions CT are the exact same. I mean, do you think this is a different team that has potential, or do you think this is a team that's sort of doomed and sort of been stuck in its ways for a long time, and this was sort of a lucky tournament win?
I mean, I don't. It's hard to answer. Like, they do play different. I think they're more like quick execute laden than they were previously. I thought their previous style was more subtle, much more like a Fallen team, and I think they were underrated in terms of the subtleties of their games and their executes, and like but that's not to say that they were geniuses, but that's just, they were certainly no pushovers when it came to their tactics. So I think that there's a bit, like, to say that they're playing the same, or that they're playing just as tactically or intelligently, would be a bit disrespectful to the previous roster, or the previous, like, with Karrigan as an in-game leader. But at the same time, I don't know if what they're doing is super unsustainable. It just depends on what their ambitions are. Like, if you're expecting to beat Team Liquid or Na'Vi next time, you're probably in for a disappointment. Like, I don't think that.
Well, I think actually on that point that they're probably more likely to beat top teams with this style in like single like in a vacuum, series to series to series, they probably have a higher chance of having those like random best of 3 wins than they did in the past, but definitely not. Well, I guess in that sense as well, they probably weren't going to win a tournament with the old style anyway. So
yeah, but like the thing, see, the one that bothers me is the Liquid one, because I really thought that Liquid should have won that, and so it's very. I feel so strange about. I don't know what to expect next time, because
I think Liquid was the better team going in that series, and like by a pretty good stretch, they should have won.
So poorly.
Yeah.
Like it seemed like they never settled individually at all.
NiKo specifically had a very poor series versus FaZe, right?
No. Especially the second map. But yeah, so Nitro definitely struggled. I thought the second map was Inferno, right?
Like 4 kills in the first half.
In fact, I think they could have won that if he had played better. But like on Mirage, which was to me like the one that set the tone for the best of 3, it was like Liquid should have been able to win that map given how FaZe was playing, and it makes me think that like if they didn't know how to play and they can never get settled individually. It makes me feel like they're just not good at playing against that kind of style, because there's no like, it's a new team, or there's no excuse for that. Like, they're making fast executes. How am I going to react? Oh, I'm just going to push through a smoke and die over and over again. Thanks, Naf. Like, it's not really that does worry me for Liquid specifically, but for Na'Vi or for Astralis, like they should get clapped every time. But it's at the same time, like, I don't want to be too rough on them, because I think that they could beat, MIBR. They beat NiP at this tournament too. NiP is probably not a pushover. I guess we have to see more of NiP. But, so I think they could still be, like a top 5 team. They could make some semis. But whether or not, if they want to,
that seemed to be FaZe's position for the majority of 2018. Like, I was pretty surprised. I think FaZe's run in 2018 has been actually kind of underrated. They made top 4 at every single tournament they've entered, save Marseille, where they faced Astralis in the quarterfinals, and they lost. So, FaZe has been, it's only been since E-League Premier where they had some lackluster results. Do you think, here's like my base. I'll give my opinion now. But, even if you do say that the cycle resets and this is a new team and this is gonna, this is gonna give new life, that goes from a slumping team who's not making top 4s anymore to maybe top 8s or not even making it to the playoffs. Even if you say, okay, this is a reset, they're not gonna have a peak as great as their peak previous. This team's going all the way back to last year, and they're probably in their time lasting as a top 4 team is probably not going to be as long, because simply this is a worse version of FaZe in that they have a less efficient structure. Kerrigan as an individual player is not an efficient use of their talent. NiKo being forced to take in-game leading responsibilities. Okay, he had a great tournament here, but how long can he keep up this form while taking up these additional responsibilities? How long can they play with this very limited map pool that we've seen before teams turn and understand that they can't play, say, Train or Overpass? If they cannot, we have to see how their map pool is tested moving forward, right? So I just don't... Go ahead.
See, with that, it's the idea that, like, this is an entirely different person. What you have to reframe is that this is still the same FaZe, but they've just been diagnosed with life-threatening cancer and have 2 months to live. And they just immediately upon receiving the diagnosis, they didn't go down to the hall and see a radiation specialist. They didn't ring loved ones. They just immediately went down to the liquor store and just bought 3 bottles of wine and a packet of cigarettes, and then they're taking this shit all the way.
But my scenario was the more positive scenario in that they are a new team. The less positive scenario is that they're the exact same team, and this is just a continuation of their. Yeah. This isn't a new cancer. This has been for a long time. This is a really long running team, 14 months, almost 15 months. This is an old team by Counter-Strike standards, right?
Definitely.
So this is if you see it as an old team, it's oh, this is a cool little blip, and we'll see if, but this trend has been completely perfect downhill. Like amazing team, very good team, average team at E-League Major and ESL 1 New York. And yeah, maybe this one term is sort of an anomaly.
Yeah, as I said though, I think they have. I still refuse to totally discount them. Just
well,
like
they're still decent. They have so much
Yeah.
talent on that roster. It's just impossible to think that they can't win a series versus a top team still.
Well,
I mean,
let me
even
put it this way:
Astralis lost that best of 5 at Sydney.
like if I would put money on it, I would say that they beat another top 3 team in the world over the next 3 months in a series.
Mm-hmm.
But they will never win another tournament. Like if they beat Astralis in a best of 3 at just like some like random group stage or just some random best of 1, I wouldn't wake up and go like, what? Like how is this even possible? I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. Like NiKo dropped 120 plus ADR. Oh, cool, gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not pro roster move right now at all. Like I think this roster is dead because like I do think that I don't know why this is, but for some reason it really does feel like the longer you stay with the roster with the same 5, like the energy slowly becomes lethargic, and like you don't have this new like, oh, let's just recreate everything, and you need to, and like you can do that. Like I know that G2 has done that with the G2 with the previous roster, the Body and NBK and Apex and Shocks, like that roster many times was like, okay, this isn't working, let's just restart everything, and they would have a little, they would improve, and then they would go back down to being absolutely mediocre. So I think that, but given the fact that they're not really playing a style that's cultivated, I don't think that this is their, the only option that's left is for them to just play really loose, which they haven't done yet. That might work, but otherwise this is static. Sometimes I feel like they're getting bored in the server. Like it's not great, but at the same time, but here's the reason I don't think they should have a roster move. Despite that, is because like everyone, include probably themselves, but everyone is judging this roster on whether or not it can win tournaments. And if you're going to do that, then you need to make really smart roster moves, and you need to be very careful with who you add and who you remove.
Definitely.
Like, so you have to be. So for example, maybe it isn't removing Kerrigan. Like that might not be the right move.
Sunny and Rain. You said it before I could even say it, Sam. Thank you so much. That's it.
Well,
that's exactly what I was thinking.
Well, actually, here's mine. I would cut Rain and I would cut Guardian, and I would add Woxic and Sunny.
Who and Sunny? Woxic? Say Woxic? I don't think my internet picked it up. Did you say Woxic?
But yes. But here's why. I love Guardian. I love watching Guardian.
It's the most like aesthetically pleasing thing when he grabs a 3K, right? I mean, it's like no one.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Like there's no one that looks as clean as he does with the op.
No.
And I think he's the greatest opper of all time, but he's really old, and he talks about retiring. And the problem with this team right now, on my diagnosis, is energy and enthusiasm. That's why, because I don't know if you ever watched Hellraisers. Go on Hellraiser's YouTube channel. They release their team speak, and Issa and Woxic go ham fucking every match. They have so much energy.
What's happening right now? We're really talking about energy levels again in this episode. Like I think,
but this is important, because if you look at why did Astralis become so much better? Over they had been lethargic for months, and then they add a new player, and suddenly they become incredible.
All of Denmark raised their hands. And,
is it because
Magic's captured the spirit bomb with all that extra energy?
Exactly. Is it because Magic is some kind of god, or is it that they reset everything from start and they said, okay, let's just build a team here. Let's just do something and make it special, right? And I think that you need to do that, and you can do that. But I just think that if you're going to do that with FaZe, you're not going to have one-for-one roster improvements. There's not significant firepower improvements, because there's not a single player on that team except for Kerrigan that has an equivalent that's superior, or more than marginally superior. So when I look at that, I want to remove players that I feel like are, you know, not at the peak of their career or are not incredibly motivated. And that I don't know if Guardian is incredibly motivated or not. I just know that he's incredibly old. He's talked about retiring many times, and before last year, he spent an entire year barely playing the game. So I'm just saying that, like, when you're talking, that's the kind of player. And I would also say Olaf Meister instead of Rain. But
I think Olaf Meister is super valuable in this lineup.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think Olaf Meister is so good that it's hard for me to ask for him to be cut, and I don't see a replacement for him like an obvious replacement for him. Rain, like, I still think Rain is a good player, but Rain is a lot more like he was before this roster was formed. Now he's still good. He still has great aim. He's still, when he gets to play slow, he still gets a lot of frags, but like, I don't think that he works super well with this pace of game, and I don't think that he's been playing at his peak for a while. Like, he's been, you know, like a 1.06 player, and he's much more like when I actually once wrote an article about Rain and how he was mad overrated and he was crazy streaky, even though people like
way back in 2017, I would assume.
Yeah, but the first half of 2017. And,
well, I mean, even the second half, I thought that too. That he got way overrated when FaZe was dominant. But yeah, I agree.
Well, no, he was very good at that point in time. Like, but he was.
I mean, I bet Epicenter 2017.
Oh sure. Well, okay, I don't remember Epicenter 2017.
Oh, you don't remember what you're talking about?
No. No. But back.
I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
When they started, like, Rain. When he got really, really good, Rain started emulating basically exactly what Fur was doing at every point in time on every CT position ever and T position ever.
Yes.
And it worked really well for both of them. And at points in time, like, it's, you know, I'd say Rain was better than Fur, but both Fur, like, I don't even know what Fur's roles are in his team right now. I haven't studied MIBR at all. But like, but Rain, but since they're not playing a lot of defaults, Rain hasn't been able to slowly creep and find openings, and that's really what Rain is good at on T sides. So, like, it's weird to have him on this roster. I'd rather have someone more explosive, someone who likes to play a little more faster, is able playing faster, and that's Sunny. Like,
yes,
yeah,
like that's exactly.
I couldn't agree. I think it's almost like obvious to me in terms of, if you know the trajectory of Mouse Sports and how Sunny has already been approached by a bunch of different orgs and stuff like that, that by far and away the most clear-cut roster move is Sunny for Rain. Because if you think of Sunny's peak in 2017, I think it's comparable to, like, Rain and Fur's peak last year, like Sunny's peak this year. Like, he was a top player
Sunny
in the world.
in 2018, you mean?
Oh, 2018, sorry,
you said
my bad. But yeah, like, sorry, my bad. Sunny in 2018, like, the level he was at in terms of, if you were to take games of his and remove the name tags and then compare them to the best games of, like, Rain and Fur, they're not. Yeah, it's not a clear cut, like, oh, this one's clearly a Brazilian and this one's clearly a, you know. So I think for sure that's the most clear cut one. The Guardian one is tougher. It's tougher. It's like,
I want to see Woxy go to a better team. I want to see him go to Mouse Sports and then jump up with the FaZe.
Yeah, sure. That's true. Like, I said Woxy because I think that he's someone that's, you know, probably available. Like, I know that he has visa issues, but, like, he's not on a super good team, so it's not going to be impossible to pick him up. But, like, on, like, let's say, like, Cold Zero or something like that, like, that's much less likely to happen. But at the same time, like, when I look at Guardian, I just think that if you want to really refresh this roster, I feel because they've been playing with this 4-man core for a long time, like, you know, they've always had a player out for the last, like, 6 months. And so I feel like that. No, but I just think one player. No, fuck off. No. No.
Energy levels, dude. Energy levels.
I know.
Like,
I know. Yeah. But if you want to talk about a player that needs to play more at top events to prove himself, that's Smooya. Like Smooya has been. Do you not
remember when Smooya crushed FaZe in the semifinals of ESL 1 Cologne?
People have.
Are you hating on that
so hard?
No,
dude. People legitimately think that Smooya is the best player on Big. And, like,
dude, you're talking to one of them. Like,
I don't think that's that crazy of an opinion.
No, I think that's ridiculous. Like,
yeah,
I don't think it's ridiculous.
Tapson.
Tapson
Maybe it's
is-
just
I gotta watch more Big to be like super firm in my opinion, but just watching their games sometimes it does seem
You're
like Smooya is
talking
the big
about
impact
someone that
player.
could replace Rain. Like Taps is one of them.
Oh
like,
yeah, that's
Tapson-
actually a good
yeah.
point. I mean, okay, I was
he's
actually thinking before the
amazing.
show started, Adren and Hobbit are both excellent candidates to go into FaZe. But okay, I haven't gotten my big joke in. Okay, all right, I've been holding this one. Okay, I didn't want to interrupt this great discussion, but Sam, you said at the beginning of this segment that you weren't sold on a roster change. I can change that opinion of yours in one word. Okay, or 3 letters, one word. MSL.
Oh, I know what you're gonna say. No,
MSL.
I knew that. I knew you were gonna say. Dude,
Okay.
Before this
but more
episode
gen-
started, I knew this was going to be brought up.
No, okay, but more seriously, okay. In my opinion, you guys frame the discussion around Rain and Guardian. The way I would frame it would be either Rain or Kerrigan. Okay, if fans want to accept this idea that NiKo's the new in-game leader and it's a useful system, which I'm not sure I buy. I really don't know if this is going to work long term. I think there's a shelf life on this. But okay, you want to have a short term roster just from now to January or the next major. When's the next? I think the next major
February,
is like February, so it's not even that long.
Yeah.
I think why not try to upgrade Rain, keep upgrade Kerrigan, maybe grab a player like Adren, and do that way. You could also go the other way, replacing Kerrigan and getting an in-game leader, someone maybe available, someone with proven track record, maybe someone from the same country, maybe someone who isn't playing for a great team right now. But for why I say Rain is I agree with you guys that I think that Rain has really been slumping in the last half of this year. I think that he has been less willing to make these moves on the CT side, as Sam was saying, in comparison to Fur. Like, I feel like he's much more timid. I'm not sure if I buy the whole energy levels thing, but I wonder if there's a mentality
his energy levels
shift.
are fine. His chi is totally calm.
Okay,
It's
you've
just Guardian
you've assessed
chi.
his chi,
Yeah.
but or his Kai or whatever it is in Dragon Ball. But I wonder if there's something with the Chrome and Exist period. I sort of skimmed over that part in the articles because I didn't have time to do all the research. But I wonder if that sort of changed the mentality, because famously the Stu Shoes article was like FaZe is Hydra. I don't know if it's famously, probably me and like one other person. Maybe I'm probably the only person on this call who remembers it. But he compared it to Hydra. You cut off one head and 2 more grows. FaZe's strategy at the beginning seemed to be like, okay, Guardian can make whatever plays he wants. We're gonna have guys that can get 2 kills if he dies for free anyway. So we can send out waves and waves of superstars, and we're gonna have more superstars in reserves. So it doesn't matter. And I wonder if Rain lost that mentality in the Chrome and Exist period. Max, do you have an opinion on that? You were talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's because that was the thing I was most interested in FaZe is, but like before the games were played with Exist, during and after, I thought that like moment with Exist and Chrome and were these 2 incredibly rich and valuable reference points for assessing FaZe. And between Exist and Chrome, you do have 2 distinctly different individuals, but the overall system of FaZe didn't really change a whole lot. Croman was definitely more forward in the fragging pack than Exist was. They sort of had to play around the weakest link rather than being able to get Exist to play around the team, if that makes sense. So in terms of comparing the changes of FaZe, I think it was, especially with Rain, if we're talking about Rain, like that's going to affect Rain's game more with Croman than it is going to with Exist, especially when you consider the role that Olaf Master played on the T side of FaZe early in the year, which was far more aggressive than what he's playing now. And I think if you had to assess what's changed for Rain and what might be give credence to his underperformance, like Olaf Master is definitely way more passive than in terms of not like his decision making, but where he's stationed in a round than where he was previously. Because in my head, it was always sort of like Rain out, then NiKo / Olafem behind. But recently, it's been way more like Rain out than Kerrigan, NiKo behind. I noticed like Kerrigan's a lot more forward.
Yeah, especially on
yeah.
Inferno, right? I started noticing.
Yeah,
this tournament.
So I think the shift of bringing Olafmaster further back in the fragging pack, or dude, that rhymes so nicely, bringing him back further in the fragging pack, that's might be a result of the experience that they had with Croman, and maybe some internal decisions based on like how they were forced to play around Croman on T side, and how they don't necessarily need like a hard, like one of their most valuable players to be coming in second entry alongside NiKo when NiKo and Rain are already there. But inadvertently that might have affected Rain's game. I think it's a really complicated dynamic to analyze, especially when you're dealing with a player like Rain, who so much of his game and so much of his ability to gain momentum into a round hinges on his ability to hit a lot of very, very low percentage shots for the average player. So yeah, it could be that dynamic, or it could be just the fact that like he's lacked individual form in an energyless system. You know, maybe Toxic will revitalize Rain. Who knows?
No, this is not like. I don't actually know. So I would have to look at his CT and T ratings, but if I had to guess, I would posit that his T rating is the one that's down.
Yes, I would agree as well.
Wait, are you talking about Rain?
Yeah, Rain.
I think his T might be flat as CTs. I would go the opposite.
So, like a lot of Rain's success comes as a player comes off his reads in making individual plays off defaults. Like sure. I really do believe that, and that sounds so like like I've made some moral conviction, but like I do like that's what I identify in that kind of player. And
hey, there's been a lot of shit talked on this podcast so far, but if there's one fucking thing that I'm going to stand by,
yeah, exactly. But like it's not like I know that because he has such explosive aim, it's easy to think of him as a very explosive player, and further because he has very like he has a lot of multi-frags. You'd think that he's a super aggressive player, and he does entry. But
I mean, he seems to be more and more into like a solid first man almost every time kind of player.
So if you want to make an analogy, he's much like Rain is much more like Ethan than he is like Breezy. Like that's his skill set. He's much better at reading off of default and catching someone off guard and making a play based off of that. And creating space for his team. That's how I see Rain, and that means like sometimes that means being extremely successful in an entry because he has such good aim. But most of the time, like when I notice Rain saying, "Wow, he did a really good job here," it's by taking space, like, and so I don't like and not in executes. So like I think like as a CT side player, he's more on. Even though he does play a lot of forward positions. So, for example, on A-side Mirage, he tends to play towards the front of the site. His decision-making isn't as aggressive, I would say, as someone like, let's say, like Magisk.
Well, I just think his decision-making has gotten less aggressive, and that's where he had a lot of success earlier in late 2017 and earlier this year.
But I think that it makes sense. No, but the reason I say is the T side is because it makes sense to me that if you're talking like, oh, let's just move super quick, like,
oh, okay, I get what
makes sense to me. Like, that's not really what Rain
cut out
success in his peak. That's not how he was playing, or like that's not how he was finding his frags as often in the latter half of 2017. So it makes sense for me that his rating is lower. Like I don't think he's playing bad. I think he's playing fine. And his individual skill level is perfectly good. But I think that he's not shining as much in the style. No, I think that the way they're using Rain right now means that Rain isn't going to be a 120 player on this team. So if you want to make it, but the way they're using Rain right now is much more much more fitting to a player style like Sunny's, where Sunny can just rush in and make his impact on getting a triple kill entry. Like that's just how Mouse plays with him and Oscar. Like that's their game plan.
So the key is actually to bring me on as like a sports psychologist, and we'll like burn incense in the player booth. We'll do pre-game yoga. I'll like say a bunch of like Indian hymns like hum like a go like into rain.
I was on vacation last week. Last time we did an episode rather, And, so, like, I was at my parents' house, and they could hear me do most of my podcasts. And it was late at my night. And I was like, yeah, I couldn't go to sleep because you're yelling so much. But you should probably give that Sam kid a break. I don't know what you have to be so hard on.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, but no, I understand what you're saying. I think that makes sense. Okay, but I think he is set up for success. Like, as you're saying on the CT side, I think like he has a lot of positions like Pit, Inferno, Ladder Room on Train, where he is put in a position to get multi-frags and be a highly impactful player. I just not sure if he is living up to that all the time now on CT. And I think he did have more success earlier in the year, but I definitely see what you're saying with the pace issue, him not playing to his strengths, and him being more put into a full-time entry position. Doesn't seem like he's as effective.
And by the way,
NiKo? Okay, let me just switch this over. But like, I think NiKo,
sure.
my maybe impetus, like when I was looking at FaZe, like, okay, maybe this team's gonna come into like a sort of a shock sort of scenario where he's gonna call around himself. And you saw a lot of times earlier this year that NiKo does assert himself at the top of Banana's T, trying to open around up that way. But I don't know if we saw the same sort of. The clips that are coming to my mind when I'm trying to think of NiKo's high impact rounds were more CT rounds. Is this? I'm not. I was more focusing on Rain, to be honest, when I was watching these games. Is this match with what you guys are thinking, or not?
I think he's just a pretty good Counter-Strike player that like finds a lot of kills on both sides of the map.
Yeah, but I will say that like there are I didn't think NiKo played flawlessly. Like to it, like I don't know. He definitely got way more frags. But I'm not sure that he played that much better than he normally does at this tournament.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with that. I think he played, given the fact he was calling and the
sure
from him. Like, I thought he played a lot better.
Granted, but I do think that like he wasn't. It's not like he was flawless, and so like but the reason he was still incredible is just when people talk about like I don't know if NiKo played the same way or something like that. Like, it's not like he played that much better than he normally does. So to me, it's not that it's not like he'll never play like this again. It's not a strange peak like there's a Kerrigan's against Liquid where you're like, okay, well that's just not going to happen. Yeah. Even me, who loves Kerrigan, you're just like, that's not going to happen. But NiKo is fairly solid. His average rating is not so far from what he got at this event, but I think that he got a lot of success more so on the T side on entries, and just in sort of like beginning of execute moments, and that's where he found like just game breaking
in the initial burst
multi kills. Yeah.
Well, he has the best, like in terms of the way he trades frags. It might be the most like visual. He's like the guardian of trading frag. Like he just the way he moves around the site and like just he's consciously just trying to be a highlight clip all the time, and like I support that decision, just like nothing more in the world. But if I can insert like a little controversial opinion that you guys can pick apart and bully me on, I think based on because I'll frame what I was about to say. So you got this argument that the 3 best players of all time is something along the lines of Simple, Cold Zero, and NiKo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then like
I wasn't really following the game closely in the early days, so it's hard for me to really
over the last
like
2.5 years. Just
okay, and then the key arguments for each of those is like Cold Zero is sort of, even though he might have the most pedigree and the most results and the like most consistent high, he's always been in this Brazilian lineup, and he's never had to like face a great deal of adversity in which he had to transcend and like prove his worth in like the worst players or in Hellraisers or in that like Na'Vi lineup or in Now Sports. And then between Simple and NiKo, it's like Simple and NiKo both had their moments where they've like succeeded in like extreme scenarios, except like Simple is currently in this Na'Vi roster, which is really, really cushy for him individually in terms of the way the entire system is structured around him. And then is the fact that NiKo led FaZe after having like already led Mouse Sports to like a bunch of top 4s and top 8s, and now taking this FaZe roster and leading them to win EPICENTER while also being the MVP, does that like edge him out in this conversation of the three players? Like, is that to me, is that like a dot point which sort of makes it clearer that he's the best out of those three names?
I have so many things to say about this. What's
go
that?
ahead.
Because if you haven't looked at my Twitter in the last 3 days,
it was funny because you were talking.
I
remember you.
All I've tweeted about is how NiKo is the most underrated player in the world.
Oh, okay, cool.
And all the replies that I got were like, "What the fuck are you talking? Way better," and things like the most ludicrous opinion. Like if you look at all time,
I think he's under discussed this year. I don't know if he's necessarily underrated.
Yes, but that's the thing is because NiKo hasn't had a point in time where he was the best player on the best team. People think of him as second, or second or third. So second to coldzera, or second to Simple, or third to Device and Simple. And so he's never had this one moment where it's okay, this is NiKo's period. And the one moment he could have had would have been the first half of this year. But but FaZe weren't winning events.
If Cloud9 didn't win that major, right? He might get more plaudits, right? Because they were in the finals with Cloud9.
But people,
a lot of people say he choked in that major, but I mean, he had some of those plays
always
in
an
that last
afterthought. Like I was arguing last year, everyone said coldzera was the best player in the world, and like people were like, oh, but you should consider NiKo too. It's like yeah, NiKo too, but like it's coldzera.
Yeah.
And that bothers me because I think that NiKo is a more versatile player. I think he's a more impactful player, and so I think that coldzera over 2016 and over 2017, that two-year chunk of time was a better player overall. But I think that like over this period of time now, if you take I think that NiKo is a better player than coldzera right now, even though I think coldzera is still a very good player. I don't know why people are not talking about him as if he is still a good player. And I just think that NiKo is he's just perfect. Like NiKo has no flaws in his game that I can think of. And so it's true that he's not as game-breaking as Simple, and he's not quite as consistent as Device. But he just what more could you want out of a team? Out of a player for your team? He's just you don't even have to set up your game around him because he can do literally anything.
Yeah, and also the way, just to bolster that point more, we're talking before about how FaZe have this game that's what might be linear in the way of when NiKo calls, in the sense that they do just go for a bunch of fast executes, but their style could have very easily been not that. They could have very easily picked another linear version of Counter-Strike to play, but the fact that they played this fast execute style and did it in the way that NiKo called it, that was the thing that won them this grand final. For the individual performances and everything, NiKo chose a style of Counter-Strike to play, implemented it in such a way that they then won a tournament from it. No other player in history, except for maybe Shocks in 2014, or fucking MSL at Stockholm or some shit, can claim to be the MVP of a tournament, while spontaneously have been coming the IGL and then using a brand new style in the confines of a system to then win that tournament against the second and third best team in the world. To me, that pretty much makes the. I was
imagine if we could stack two of those three greatest players of all time in one team. MSL and NiKo.
You could stack
players in MVP.
You could actually put coldzera, Simple, and NiKo on the same team, and stylistically it works. There's no clash because coldzera is such a passive player, because Simple is such an aggressive player, and because NiKo can do whatever you want him to do. And so
I don't know if NiKo's ever been in the hard Zitnik's roles before. I mean,
he can though. He clutches.
He's anchored box sites.
Because
but
he'll be on Inferno. I don't know if he's given been given the full treatment though. The full bitch spot.
No,
everywhere.
So mentality wise, for sure. But what I mean is that if you take any individual spot on the map or any single any role on T side, you ask him, "Can you do this right now?" We just really need you to do this right now. He'll do it, and he can do anything. He's played super passively. He's played super aggressively. He's anchored. He's entryed. This guy can do anything, and I just feel like that's something that most people have never ever given him respect for, and for that reason, people legitimately don't consider him when they talk about the best players.
Is he the best though, Sam?
You can't answer that yet because you have to wait for like a few months to see how Simple does.
Let's pretend there's a bomb and that there's never.
You're talking about what's the time period?
Let's go from start of 2016 till now, because that was the time frame we started with.
I think Simple's more visually impressive, but I think you gotta give him credit for being able to lead teams like Mouse Sports and now this brief period in FaZe. Well, Simple is a much more independent player, right?
People are gonna mention both.
coldzera is a much more dependent player on this system.
Right, but you have to. You can't actually
NiKo
take into consideration
control of the system sometimes.
It's like when you do player rankings, you can't take into consideration those exogenous factors. And there's a reason. There's an epistemic limitation to this. Like even when I made this argument on Twitter, like Peter from HLTV confirmed that that's the way he thinks as well. And it's because you don't know what's going on inside. You can see what's going on in the server. You don't know what's going on in terms of communication, in terms of strats and such thing. And so when we talk about the best players, we're not talking about Fallen and we're not talking about Glade, right? And so I really legitimately don't think that when you're making a top 5 player, like when HLTV does its top 20 player rankings, Glaive won't be first. But if you were taking into consideration,
I get so triggered when people say Glaive's a top 5 player.
Yeah, yes, but the thing is, if you take like who's the best overall, everything considered, who's the most valuable, it might be Glaive, Glaive in that case. But the thing is that you can't consider that because you just don't know. But you don't consider those things, or we've made a decision as a community.
You can consider role within the team rather than
but not
versus
simply
player.
But not in-game leader. Not stuff like that. Not even like mentality things. Oh, he's a really nice player to be around. Something like that. So I don't want. Even though it's true that makes NiKo impressive, is that he can play very well while being an in-game leader. And his teams aren't that. Like the Mouse Sports when he was in-game leader wasn't terrible. I remember them being pretty bombastic as well, actually. But I mean, they did never make a playoff. So, but you can't actually make that credit. You should probably give it to coldzera, I think. Just because coldzera at the beginning of 2016, or 4 months into 2016, all the way till this year, he was playing at the top level, playing in finals and such things, and NiKo wasn't. NiKo wasn't making top tier finals and things like that until he joined FaZe. So that moment with Mouse Sports is difficult for me to actually give him a ton of credit for. So that's why I talk about it. It's important what kind of time span you put into it, because you can't say that Luminosity, what coldzera did on Luminosity, what wasn't more impressive than what Mouse Sports did on NiKo during that period of time, right? That seems quite unfair to coldzera.
I mean, everyone's in different circumstances. I mean, the fact we can make these comparisons because it's a thought experiment, right? There's always going to be incongruities, right? People just speak different languages, right? It's just unfair that coldzera gets to play with Fallen while NiKo has to
play with Chris J.
Chris, has to figure it out himself, right? Chris J. They're fundamentally different systems, different universes. They have their own. They're in their own world, right? They can't cross world lines, right? NiKo can't enter coldzera's body and play from his computer, right? It's just, I mean, it's sort of always going to be speculative and sort of warp that sense. You're never going to get one-to-one. I think it is a difficult question. I mean, I think coldzera had 2 really fantastic periods. The first half of 2016 and sort of the 3rd through 9th month of, or the middle 2 quarters of 2017. He was, best team in the world, best player in the world. But actually that gets me to a interesting little side digression. I want to have this argument because I saw, Sam, when you were making this rant about NiKo on Twitter, you said that Launders' criteria for who's the best player is the best player on the best team in the world. Best. How do I say this?
Best player on the best team.
Best player on the best team.
If we're going to talk, this is super interesting, but
because I don't think that makes any sense to me.
No, let me defend Launders for a moment before. Because that seems
you knew where I was going with this, so that would
but I think So the reason that Launders does this is because he's sort of a nihilist about value judgments in Counter-Strike. Like, and so he thinks that
you can say coward
even too many. There's too many epistemic limitations to make a fair judgment on a player's contribution in general. Therefore, like as we just all admitted, like you can't put Glaive number one. You just don't know. And or for example, Fallen can't be the best player of all time, even though Fallen might be the best player of all time. So you have that epistemic limitation. And so Laundra says, well, if you can't do it, then you can't do it at all, because you're cutting out such a big chunk of the game that like what the conversation we're having right now about periods of time and quality of competition, all that, he's like, fuck it. It's just like, just say best. And normally you'll get the best result. And to give credence to that opinion, that's generally how most people do generate their opinions. If you look at the best players in the world on HLTV's rankings, where it's like Olafmeister, coldzera, like those are the players that were on the best teams. There was never a device, a hipster pick or something like that. Like it's just best player on best team. That's who gets number one most of the time. This year will be the exception, probably, because Simple is probably going to get number one.
Sure.
I mean, we have a quarter to play out, but like that will probably end up being the case. And he obviously wasn't on the best team.
Not yet, baby.
But
like,
I agree with Max. Max, are you nihilistic about this, or how do you support this argument?
I agree with it in terms of like setting the parameters of a theoretical discussion, but I think in reality, like there has to be a better way, because I wrote a piece talking about at the end of last year, talking about how the entire dynamic between like Rain and NiKo and Fur and coldzera, because it's like you can't, like coldzera can't be the best player in the world unless he has Fur on his team, because so much of his success and so much of his ability to post big numbers, which is at least in the way HLTV rank players, seems to be a large portion of the way they make their judgment, because it's obviously statistical. Like if a player has 110 ADR game, that generally means
it's results-based, simple statistics, kill death and damage.
But like it'd be extremely unlikely that coldzera gets those numbers unless he has someone buying space for him to actually close those rounds, because coldzera's success is so closely tied to his ability to capitalize on late round space and for him to find favorable angles and to have room to move, just as is NiKo, as is less Simple, because Simple can often force a lot of advantages and be that player. But definitely between NiKo and coldzera, like a lot of their success hinges on the ability of not necessarily for Rain, but at least their entries and at least their second entries to open up the round for them. And due to how good Fur's numbers were as well, it's one of those things where it's like, can you, like, it seems really unreasonable to me to like disregard the nature in which they get those numbers and to completely ignore the eye test or those extra factors.
Right.
But I guess if you have to talk about it, then you probably have to, right? Like,
can I just anticipate an objection, because I can hear one that's going to come, because people are going to say, well, Fur isn't playing well right now, and coldzera still has a 1.24 rating. But to that person, which was my inner voice as well when you said it, it is also true that he currently has Fur, Tarek, and Stewie on his team, and that collectively, collectively, MIBR is one of the best teams in the world at getting entries. So even though they may not be good overall, they're really good at getting openings into rounds. So
I was just gonna say, the talent on that team is ridiculous. But
better than FaZe.
Yeah, but they don't. See, that's, I think, a topic for another discussion. Maybe we can get a good guest on here to talk about it, because it seems so like it's in this enduring question with MIBR. They have so much talent on that roster. They just had such a bad 2018 mostly. It's just like, how is this like not working? The pieces are all there, and then they got this sort of the Reddit or like the community generally like favorite coach in Yanko behind them, because he's so well known for his like everyone has seen his tactical depth and nuance, because he's been on so many broadcasts, and yet they still don't work. It's so strange. But I'll say Cold Zero over NiKo. You can make value judgments. You just gotta throw the dice sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think here's what I told Launders, and we talked about this like many times because I got really annoyed. And it's like in a state of inquiry, if I ask you a question, and maybe the question I'm asking you, in this case, Cold Zero or NiKo, like that's a bad question. But in trying to answer that question, you can learn more about how to judge players. So by talking about like, oh yeah, Cold Zero does this, but NiKo does this, and which is more valuable, or for example, talking about the mere fact that Cold Zero relies on another person, how should that affect how we judge them? All these things make us much smarter as a community on how to judge, or as some people in the community, to improve like how we judge players and become more and more fair. So that we can
at some point you gotta pick a side though.
That's what I mean. Is like it's okay to pick a side, because in making an argument,
as long as you justify your opinion, and that's
yes, and like, but what I mean is
pedagogical.
Yeah. So even though you're not reaching the truth,
I mean, it's obviously
you are learning a lot.
Impossibly subjective.
Well, so I'm glad we've all agreed NiKo is the best player in the world, and that Cold Zero from the outset.
Sam, just go for a name. Just do it. You can say it.
I said Cold Zero, but because of the period of time, like if you took 2017 and then now, I would say NiKo, because if you just
removed the two major periods, Columbus and
Well, I thought NiKo was the best player in the world last year, so I think NiKo. But if you take because he was on Mouse Sports and he was a slave.
This is where I wish there was just some crazy a counter podcast to this one, which just took clips and just roasted this podcast. So we just go on this huge discussion about all the nature of evaluating the best player in the world, and then you just clip Sam saying, "I thought NiKo was the best player in the world last year," and then just do a 45-minute rant on how retarded that is.
But people do think that's outrageous. But again, as I said on Twitter, I legitimately think that people just think Cold Zero is better because he was on a better team, and that's a given. That's just epistemically, people just
FaZe was
think
a pretty good team for a bit there. I mean,
yeah, but
SK
the
was
point
the
is that they were very much worse than, and I bet you that if it was 50-50, people would be giving NiKo much more fair shake. But people look at the success of a team. They've always done this. You look at how many for a team game. Let's judge the individual player by the team's achievements. People always do that.
Also, that Cold Zero is a standout star on SK. Well, NiKo sort of has these names around him now, which also limits how much he's discussed. I mean, I think you've talked about. I mentioned this episode, and you talked about Twitter. He's sort of an under-discussed player. I think when you have legends like Guardian, Olaf Meister, even Rain just sort of came into his own in 2017. I think that sort of crowds out how much people can talk about NiKo and praise him, right?
That's true, is because you stop referring to NiKo specifically and you refer to, it's a super team, You talk about NiKo and Rain and whatever. You don't just go fucking NiKo, man.
I mean,
but
I suggest that we as much as we want to say this Epicenter tournament was the NiKo show, I mean, Guardian I think was right there with him sometimes.
But, Guardian was very, very good.
Yeah.
But it's the thing, a Guardian is good sometimes. It's he always has a capability, and I don't remember seeing a game in which he was straight up bad. Nothing comes to mind, but over the last 6 months. But he does there are moments where he shines, and
Well, in all fairness, Sam, how many elite AWPers are there out there where you see a game where they're just bad? I think in general it's pretty. I think there's people talk about how good Shazam. I'm really critical on AWPers. I'm talking. I think Kenny S has been playing has been underperforming recently. I think Guardian has, but it's again goes back to the whole value thing. To me, for example, if you're an AWPer, you should probably hit your first shot at a very, very high percentage, and your positioning should come at a cost of your rifle's positioning, and these sort of fundamental things. Where I think you have to hold AWPers to a very, very high standard, and so that's something that at least analytically.
And that's another thing. We look at people will not give NiKo fair shake and who's the best player in the world this year because you look at Device and you look at Simple and their ratings are higher, right? Like, especially.
I don't know if
But, like,
do you think Device is legitimately in the conversation for best player of the year?
No.
Yes.
God, no.
I no, but I think people are legitimately talking about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, dude, that's like that's pound for pound, the most tilting thing I see on Reddit, and I don't know who does them, but they should be like permanently shadow banned from the community. Is those like infographs where it's just like a player's face like holding an MVP trophy, and then just like their HLTV stats on lane over the last 3 months, and then another player's face holding an MVP trophy and their stats over the last 3 months. So it's like,
dude,
who's better? It's like, dude, please.
That's the whole reason we started this podcast. That episode 1. Fuck HL, like fuck using just looking at tournament to tournament HLTV ratings overall as your basis of rating players. The screenshot where it's like 10 tournaments, all positive not positive, all over one. No. So therefore they're good.
You're so wrong there. Well, the post it's. Oh my god, Device's last negative game was in 2015, and then they posted, and it's just like, oh no.
There are players for which, like, when I look at Electronic, like, whether or not he had a good game is telling in his stats. Like, you can tell when he has a bad game. But with Oppers,
real quick?
Yeah, just once. Let me make a point about this, and then we can transition. Like, when it comes to Device and Coldzera, but like when it comes to Device, you have to be really careful because Device's style generates just free kills, and that's part of Astralis' system, and that's great. But that credit should be given to the system as a whole. And so Device can have a bad game and be very bad in some situations and still generate a decent scoreline, like 20 and 17 or something like that. Just in virtue of his role on the team. So you have to be careful when you judge Device's stats relative to anyone else.
For sure.
Yeah. Go on Navi.
Oh yeah, dude. Well, I wanted to touch on Electronic because, what did you guys get a chance to watch any of Navi's games at EPICENTER?
I was sort of focused on the FaZe side of the equation because of the article.
Yeah, but I did watch them.
But I mean, there was that curious thing where Electronic seemed to be particularly lackluster in that one Mirage game, if I remember correctly, versus FaZe.
Well, like
it was Dust2 where it was really bad, but he was also bad on the Mirage.
He just had a bad tournament overall, I think, in terms of what I normally expect from him. But I think it's this really interesting dynamic in Navi overall, where if we think Navi's peak in 2018 was when they beat Astralis in the semifinals of ES1 Claw in 2018. In terms of if you had to like map their trajectory overall, that was their biggest win. That was like their biggest series win, their biggest tournament win, and it was also the one where Simple didn't even have a good tournament. Like I am
by his standards,
especially.
Well, like Tronic had as good or better tournament as Simple that tournament.
And the more I watch them, especially at New York and especially at EPICENTER, I don't think there's cause for alarm in Navi. I think the way they lost to FaZe and the way they lost to Gambit are actually very similar in the way that both those teams beat Navi, in the sense that they struggle to deal with. I guess like every team would struggle with it. Just the sort of we have nothing to lose. Let's take a lot of duels approach. But I think like specifically at EPICENTER, they seem to look their best when Simple isn't necessarily the best on their team. Because when Simple is forced to have these huge games, that to me is the canary in the coal mine, that there's a lot of other things that aren't right in the team. And I think for this tournament, that was Electronic in large part, and also just the fault of Navi's system as a whole, in which it seems like they rely in a similar fashion to FaZe in having momentum into a half in order to dominate their half, given the fact that they often will force a lot, which teams can punish them for, that they like to make a lot of stacks on CT side, which can only really be done when you have a round advantage, or else you just get reset. And they, in general, seem to rely a lot on the spontaneous teamwork and trading that emerges in the mid to late round. And to me, like, Electronic not performing is a really, really, really important factor as to why they fail into a game, especially when they are behind, because when you think in general into like all their early round scenarios, it's Electronic who I think might this would be where you'd need a stat to show it, but it would seem to me, based on the eye test and watching some Na'Vi games, that Electronic is afforded more openings in the early round when Na'Vi are getting map control, and then Simple is the guy who finds the multi-kills to close and then can also work picks off the default with the AWP when there's like nothing happening in the mid-round. So I don't know, like, what do you guys think of Electronic's presence? This notion, the broader notion that like when Simple is looking the best, that's not generally when Na'Vi is at their best.
Yeah, well it's like because Simple is an off most of the time, and Electronic has a rifle. When Electronic tries to make a play or tries to work an opening, it's much more risky, and so he takes those risky engagements. Well, like Simple gets much more like free kills based on positioning, catching someone off guard, and so like he's much more at risk every time. He's putting more of he's flexing his individual skill much more than Simple is on an average kill, and so it becomes very important for him to be on top of his game, like. And I do think that like Simple most of the time, like the round will be in contention, and like when Simple starts to have his impact, and you sort of notice him, like it'll already be he's not normally the first point of contact in an execute. So even though he might get a pick on a default and then fall back, he's not necessarily the person that like rushes like Fountain on overpass and gets 3 kills. Like that's not really what he's about. So he's not going to win you the round early. That's quite rare, because oppers are not generally put in situations to win the round early. Electronic puts his skin on the line much more, and so it makes sense to me that he's like a sort of a litmus test for how well they're going to do. What worries me about that is that that this is the second LAN where Electronic is not really good, and like so Electronic was really, stats-wise, because I didn't watch all of Navi's games, but stats-wise, he did very well at the beginning of the tournament, and so he ended with a 112, which is below his standard, but it's still fine. But like in the FaZe match and in the Avant-Garde match, but especially in the FaZe match, he looked disconnected from his team, and he looked quite poor. Like I remember there was one round on the A site, which is the site that got exploited so heavily. That was Electronic's job, right? FaZe executed on the A site, and all of Na'Vi fell back behind the smokes, and you just see like it wasn't even like the broadcast didn't hover over it, but Electronic just jumps over into Tetris and tries to make a play alone and just dies, and you're like it was like a Stewie 2K move if you went like even farther with it and you didn't and it was like it was so
jump to the pop flash.
It was so weird because it wouldn't even have been a bad play if you had Flamey that moved along with him and pushed through the smoke, so they would have been able to trade. But he was just alone, so he guaranteed that he was going to get 1 kill, maybe. Like, and if he he was transcendent, he would have gotten 2. But like, why are you making that play when your entire team is clearly falling back? And so to me, I thought that he just got quite tilted and that he's getting frustrated. And I just don't think that individually he's in a great place right now, and that concerns me because I think it's not just his aim. Like, it looks like his decision making is taking a toll. So I am worried about Na'Vi for that reason, because their success is very much predicated on Electronic being a 120 level player, in terms of fragging. So, yeah.
Well, I thought, Max, you framed it really interesting, talking about the CT pushes, CT stacks, and the force buys, because I don't think I've ever connected the dots. I don't know if you're doing this on purpose or not, but yeah, the force buy narrative with Na'Vi is pretty well known. I think that it's not so established that they're a big CT stack team, but I think they are. I think that's something I've noticed many times. And it's interesting the way the first thing that came to Sam's mind was the risk that Electronic takes. I wonder. I'd have to watch more games, but this is sort of an interesting theory, and it sort of makes sense now that I'm framing it, but I would have to sort of watch games and with this in mind. But I wonder if Na'Vi is a risk-oriented team, and they often channel that risk through Electronic, and if Electronic isn't able to get that done, they instead channel the risk through other avenues, right? Through the CT stacks or through force buys, right? They need to get that edge, and if they're not getting the edge through Electronic, they're sort of thrown off balance and will try to, or just. Yeah, I mean they try to force it too hard, or they accentuate their negative tendencies even further.
I think they're always going to be there, but it's just Electronic is the facade where it just makes it seem calculated and reasonable to do, when
okay.
it's always unreasonable and not calculated
sort
to
of
do.
the risk-oriented play.
For sure.
Yeah, but
it gives them more room. That's what I said. Like, that's what I was trying to say is, like, Electronic gets them ahead, and it just is so much more devastating when Na'Vi plays that style, because then suddenly you're trying to grind back into a half and you try to do a standard execute towards B on Inferno, and then there's fucking 4 players there, and it's like, sick. Now we have no guns, didn't get any kill, we didn't get a bomb plant. Now we're even further behind, and then even if they go to the A site, Na'Vi can afford to save 4 because they're already ahead in round, so it's not as costly a play. And that, like, this similar sort of logic applies to, like, the double AWP setups as well, and to how aggressive they can be on CT side, and to a lot of different elements of Na'Vi's game, like, hinges on their ability to, like, be ahead in rounds to make those riskier choices.
Yeah, but I think that, like, so as I was mentioning, they were playing a lot of retake on that A site, and I think that's really bad for Na'Vi, because they don't really have, like, they don't have the depth to actually, like, win, like, 3-on-3 retakes that often.
I mean, that's not the style of team that doesn't seem to be their specific strength.
But it is something that they generally do. Like, they're not the most assertive CT teams in the execute. Like, I was talking about, like, how pressure response, right? They don't respond to pressure aggressively. You would think they would, because they have Electronic and Simple, which are very aggressive players, but they're quite conservative. And, like, to me, it just really bothers me, because so many times you're, like, in a 2v3 situation, and you know, and if you were, like, if Simple was alive or something, maybe you had your way into the round, but you have Edward, or you have, like, even Flamey, you have, like, Flamey and Zeus are alive, and you're like, okay, well, like, I guess we'll just save, like, and so you really need to, like, it feels to me like if they don't get an advantage, if they don't move forward, they can take advantage of pretty easily. Like, but they're pretty good at closing man advantage rounds. In fact, like, this is surprising, but the only team that's better at closing man 5v4s than they are is obviously Astralis. But, like, you'd think Liquid is better, but they're not. Like, they're really good at shutting it down. But once it gets gritty, like, they're not a good gritty team at all. Consider, like, if people start pushing and stuff, like people like FaZe, or like even like people like Nip, like if they start getting in your face, like, Na'Vi is not, like, good enough to, like, individually, like, skill wise, is not good enough or smart enough to really compete in those gritty matches and get the upper hand. So, and maybe it's just because they don't have that player, like, they don't have a player like Coldzera, like, or Sergey or something like that. I don't know, but, like, that is a weakness in their game, and so they really desperately need to be able to get man advantages, get 1 or 2 kills as the execute is coming in before they fall back. And think this seems to me to be, like, essential. And so at the moment, to me, like, the moment that Electronic is not one of the best players in the world, Na'Vi stops being one of the best teams in the world. And that's a big problem. That's a really big problem for them. Because, and the reason it's a big problem is because, like, Electronic isn't reliable yet. He's only been like this for, like, 6 months, right?
Very true.
Like, well, and look at Navi's also, to go back to the start of this podcast, Navi's also been a team that's been together for, what, a year now? When did they pick up Electronic? About this time last year? So,
yeah, I mean, but it's, like, also you have to remember, like, the Electronic that was picked up and the Electronic that became a top 5 player in the world are 2 very different things. Like, he was playing almost a supportive, like, bitch role when he joined Navi.
Yeah, but at least 10 months, like, a long time. So
yeah, I mean, then there's the whole Gambit breakup thing happening. But I don't want to get into another roster.
No, I think they should make a roster move.
I mean, I think they should, but I was going to end the podcast. I don't want to get a whole big roster discussion before. We'll save that for the next one, maybe. Maybe a little MIBR, maybe. Who knows? I can't think of a final joke, so I'll just end the